Thanks very much. So you can ask yourself, what is regulatory strategy? It's kind of an intangible, but it's a necessary entity for our business for sure. So I'm going to walk through today in a series of trying to put regulatory strategy into some sort of a more tangible framework. By agenda, I'll talk about different categories of regulatory strategy, because regulatory strategy spans the globe, and there's a long continuum of what types of strategy you need to develop, whether it's a pre-market device or a post-market device, or we touch a lot on reimbursement as well. Dr. Hirsch did a great job of setting the stage in that framework. So we'll specifically talk about that and try and put some tangible, quantifiable deliverables on that piece of the regulatory strategy development. And then we'll talk about the key endpoints for driving an FDA interaction. A discussion with FDA is vital, but there's a time and a place for it, and there's a process for it. So I'll walk through that process, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. You can stop me along the way, though. I'm comfortable with interrupting, so if there's a point you need more clarification on, please just jump right in. So I put strategic sort of regulatory strategy into 4 major buckets. First one is the pathway to market clearance. This is categorizing and defining the requirements for a new whiz-bang device. Guy in his garage comes to see me, says, "Hey, what is this?" Like we had a question this morning, is this a medical device? I get that question all the time. Then the next phase of strategic categories I place in the pre-market plan and agency negotiations. This is, okay, I have my widget. I decided that this is where I want to take this widget. Now I want to establish a pre-market plan. And that could be whatever country, and we'll talk a little bit more about we're focused here today primarily on the U.S., but I do want to recognize that it's a small world these days, and please remember there's a whole world outside of the United States. And then we'll talk about the regulatory negotiations that are critically involved with ongoing submissions, whether those are IDEs, 510Ks that are hitting a roadblock, or PMAs that are in process or in flux. And then the last major category I categorize strategy under is marketed products that have a need. So this is, okay, got my widget on the market, I got a 510K, and I don't like the labeled indication. My sales force is really burdened with their limitations on the claims. I need to expand on that. That's the other major area of strategy. And we'll talk also about things gone awry. I think that's another a critical area that we spend a fair amount of time speaking with the agency on. So with these 4 major areas, let's walk through each one of them separately. First one, strategy for establishing a pathway to market clearance. Just some major considerations, and this is like a big survey that I'm providing here today, so we could spend a whole day on any one of these categories. So remember that this is just icing on the cake right here. We're going to touch on everything, and we can talk later if you need more information about any of these that you need to go more deeply on. So considerations for your market and regulatory. And this is a handshake with regulatory affairs and marketing. And that's a key to this whole thing being successful. So you want to think about the territory. You want to think about, where is this disease most prevalent? It's not taking a dart and throwing it at a map. It's really doing some thorough research on, hey, this is the market, this is where this disease is most prevalent in the world, and I need to go there, whether that's the middle of India or in the middle of China. That's the place you want to focus on. It may not be the United States. And the cost to obtain approval is something that needs to be considered. Some countries, if you're a guy in a garage, but you have something that is most relevant for India, that might be a difficult endeavor for you to raise money to do that in that country when you sit in, Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. So those are all parts of the strategy to put together. And the cost and the burden to maintain that approval. It doesn't just, it's not just I get that approval and then I'm good to go for the rest of the life of the product. There's vigilance cost, there's maintaining your application, there's maintaining your quality system. All of those factors need to come into play to identify just what you're going to do with that little widget that you dreamed up in your garage. And then there's always the investor. I work with a lot of venture capital backed companies and a lot of VCs that will come and say, okay, I saw this guy in the garage, Lauren. What do you think? Is it going to be ready for prime time? And if so, how much is it going to cost me? They say it's going to cost me $50. Is it $50 or $500 million? So those are all the pieces of the very, very early on component of aligning the market and the regulatory strategy. The balance really comes with establishing a good targeted marketing plan, coupled with a strong regulatory strategy. Linked together, those will have a successful and timely product introduction. Otherwise, I see a lot of times where those two don't come together well in the early stage, and there's a going back, a process where you're continually realigning. Oh, did I say India? I meant to say Brazil. Did I say Brazil? Maybe it was Zimbabwe. Knowing your product and where its place is in the market is key to being successful. So we develop the high-level plan. You get a high-level understanding of the market approval regulations, what's going to be required on vigilance, and what's going to be required on standard reporting. Those are your regulatory high-level plans for each one of your territories that you're interested in. And together that can be compiled into what I call the playbook. You have a high-level playbook. Okay, here's your widget. This is how to get the widget approved in the territories where the disease is most prevalent. That playbook goes on your roadshow for raising capital. That's phase one of regulatory strategy. Next phase is probably the most intense phase, which is where we come up with a regulatory strategy in the pre-market venue. And that has 4 basic steps. First, determining what the product category is. And this is sort of some overlap. The phase A of the high-level market plan coupled with the pre-market plan, there's some overlap here. You certainly want to know before you go on a roadshow that this is going to be regulated as a medical device. But let's talk about this, because this piece of it comes into play because there's a lot of interaction with the agency for certain types of new novel technologies that you think, oh, that should be a no-brainer whether I'm making a device or a drug. Sometimes you don't always know. So the second piece is once you determine which body of the FDA you're under, you will then need to establish what type of submission. Am I going to be a 510K? Or is this going to ride over into a PMA? Or is this maybe a de novo 510K? And am I scared of de novo? Those are the kind of considerations in step 2. And we're going to walk down each one of these steps in a little bit more detail. And then number 3 is developing the appropriate detailed strategy. And a lot of times people say, oh, I want a reg strategy. This is the component that they really are speaking of. But I put regulatory strategy in a larger continuum because I think there are a lot more factors that come into a good, solid reg plan. So this detailed strategy is where we talk about whether we need to have a pre-submission. Do we want to talk to the FDA or do we want to talk to our notified body? Is that going to be good for us? And we'll walk through that a little bit more. And then I put the reimbursement thing right up front. I think that Dr. Hirsch has really set the stage for how critical that is. When I first started in this business, no one even talked about reimbursement. That was like, oh yeah, we're going to give that down the road. After your job is to get this product approved, come up with a clinical trial with the lowest number of patients and the quickest return, and then we don't need to worry about that reimbursement thing. Now it's near and dear to my heart. I have a lot of companies that I've worked with to get funding, and those clients, unfortunately, if they couldn't show up front how they were going to get that product reimbursed and that they were going to get a premium for that product, sometimes those products never made it to prime time because they never got funded. Money's really tight in the VC world right now. Having a good, solid strategy to bring to those VCs is critical. So let's walk down each one of these. Step 1, product category. And because this is a medical device summit, I'm focused on medical device. This is the definition of a medical device. For those, I'm sure you've all seen this definition before, but sometimes you actually have to go back and look, is this a device or not? Is it recognized in the official national formulary? Is it intended for diagnosis? Is it intended as a therapeutic? Those are the things that you have to step back from and ask the question, is it going to fit this definition? And sometimes it's not so easy to determine. And when it gets to that point where I'm not so sure, we're going to go through some examples. There is a pathway, and I don't know, has anyone actually gone through this request for determination process? Anybody do this before? So this is actually a very helpful step in the process when you have something that is a mixture of maybe a device and a biologic, or where you don't quite know where it's going to be defined. There is an actual section of the regulation associated with the determination of what the governing body is at FDA. The formal request, it needs to be based on establishing the primary mode of action, whether it's the primary mode is achieved through mechanical form, whether it's achieved through the device route, through the drug route, or through a biologic route. The outcome of this request is actually a primary review division, and there will likely be a co-review. So that you need to understand that this is a binding document that comes back. That decision is final. You don't have a lot of leeway, so it's incumbent upon you to do your homework and make sure that if you want this to go one way versus another, that you have done the research to establish that document is well thought out and the primary mode of action is well described. There is a guidance available for it, how to write a request for designation. It's like all FDA guidance documents, not perfect. It's a guide. So take that to heart when you're reading that guide. Let's talk through a couple of examples. This one is near and dear to my heart. I actually worked on Taxus way back at Boston Scientific. Metallic stent coated with a drug. And we saw that drug-eluting stent earlier today. Primary mode of action is mechanical. That is a mechanical scaffold, and it elutes drug over time. And that drug elution enhances the performance of the mechanical scaffold. So that one, pretty straightforward. Next one, a wound dressing with collagen. So a wound dressing, there's a lot of fancy wound dressings out there these days. Fancy Band-Aids, fancy everything. Everything's got, fake skin, all sorts of pieces to that puzzle. So this one, again, primary mode of action is mechanical. That wound dressing would do nothing. That collagen would do nothing without the wound dressing being there to apply it. So you still are achieving primary mode of action as mechanical wound dressing. And the collagen is enhancing that performance of enhancing the speed of healing. And then the last one I have is the Lantus Solar Star pen. So this is a primary mode of action. The Solar Star pen is mechanical. It is a vehicle for delivery of insulin, but it is going to be regulated because you are delivering that drug. So it is a drug delivery product. So let's move on to step 2, establishing PMA or 510K. And we've gone through the request for designation. We've determined that we are going to be a medical device. And so now it is PMA or 510K. I would review the guidance documents for any kind of similar devices. You want to look at the databases, and I'll give you a little bit of a survey of how to approach that search engine. That's the place that FDA goes. Remember that FDA has a lot more examples in their pocket, so you want to make sure that you've done your homework and understand where you could classify your device. You have a novel technology, but I think it could fit within the auspices of this Band-Aid type area, or I think it could be under this, coronary stent arena. You should, when you go through the 510K database or the PMA database, utilize the pro codes and the regulation. Go to those sources to expand upon your search. And we'll walk through a couple of examples with that. And then I also spend a lot of times reading through the summaries, both the 510K summaries and the SSEDs for PMAs, to get some more information. Okay, if the company, if Covidien has a device that they had a predicate that was made by Medtronic and another one by Boston Scientific in their 510K, I'm going to go to those predicates and see if I can get some more information. Okay, their claim, their indication statement is very akin to what I'm trying to do with this new novel products 510K. I think I can use that as a valid predicate. And we don't have to go through, we could have another lecture on how to establish a good solid predicate and 510K leveraging and the strategy around a 510K development, because that's definitely a talk into on itself. But suffice it to say that this is the roadmap to establishing how to get that information. This is just a look. Everybody recognize this? This is familiar to everyone? Everybody uses this search engine? Good. Okay, so we'll just look at it quickly. The pro code, you can see I put in a random pro code, MAX. So I'm going to pop that in and see the search engine, and I pulled up one product in that pro code of MAX. And here I see that MAX also has a regulation number, 888.3080. This happens to be an interbody system. This is from Zimmer Spine. It's a fusion device. But this one says fusion device with bone graft. So let's see what the regulation says. This regulation actually has through a couple of different components to it. It says that it covers an intervertebral body fusion device implanted single or multiple level. So if you've got a little fusion device, and let's say you put some, RHBMP on that little fusion device, what would that be? How would you classify that? Under this, it says that under the classification, it's class 2 with special controls for a fusion device that contains bone graft material. Is that what you have? Not sure. And then if you look on number 2, it says class 3 PMA for an intervertebral body fusion device that includes any therapeutic biologic, for example, bone morphogenic protein. So, okay, now your little widget based on this regulation would be called class 3. So that's the way we use this. Of course, there's several different ways to go deeper. I just give you that as a high-level example. You can see this shows 10-plus screens of 10-plus devices that have this same pro code of MAX. So it is a little bit of a labor-intensive process to walk through each one of these devices and see if you can find yourself a 510K predicate that would match your product. We do the same thing on the PMA side. After you do the 510K database search, you go over on the PMA side and make sure you are not a PMA if you're trying to be a 510K, or vice versa. I don't see a lot of people trying to be a PMA, but sometimes. And this one, I put in NIQ because I wanted to see my friend Taxus, Liberté paclitaxel eluting coronary stent. And I show it here. NIQ is the pro code, and it is a PMA number P06, so this is a while ago now. And I pull up the SSED. This is where I go deep. Everyone here has looked at an SSED. You know that it has a whole plethora of information, both preclinical and clinical. That's where I garner all the information about what's the way I need to test a drug-eluting stent. You know, if you've never made one before, do I need to do anything special with the drug? Well, you'll look at this and you'll find out how your comrades have done it in the past. It's, you know, there's a lot of toxicology, there's PK, there's a whole myriad of testing that is specific to the drug on top of testing specific to the mechanical function of the device. So that tells me a little bit about how I go deep on the preclinical regulatory assessments. I need to do the same thing. That just establishes 510K versus PMA. And now I'm going to talk about the testing part. Again, I look at any available guidelines that might exist. The coronary drug-eluting stent world is very, very common now, as opposed to the early days when we were sort of burgeoning our way through the whole maze of how FDA and the companies were learning on their own. Now there's a guidance document. It tells you exactly how to do the testing. And again, I still look at the SSEDs, even with the guidance document. That's a guide, and sometimes it's not always really totally adopted by the medical device community. There are sometimes some recommendations in those guidance documents that are not always adhered to. And this one example I show here is the SSED for Taxus. We looked at that previously. And it's important at this point, we talked in the last phase of how important it was to align your marketing and regulatory strategies together. This is when engineering and regulatory really need to be synergistic and of like mind and talking off the same playbook. You don't want to, you want to be totally in sync in terms of, okay, here's my product, here are the guidelines. You work with an engineer to understand from the pure technical standpoint, what's the best way for me to mechanically validate or verify this design, to verify its safety, that it's safe enough to use in human subjects for a clinical trial, that it is not going to fail, and if it does fail, that you have mitigations for any kind of expected failure. That's all risk analysis. Regulatory and engineering work together on risk analysis. Regulatory and engineering work together on establishing a test plan. It's not one or the other. Then it's time to pause and understand whether you need to have a regulatory interaction. You have your playbook, you have your established plan of attack in terms of validating your product and verifying its design for use. It's oftentimes at this juncture that we pause and say, I think before we do anything further, it's a good idea to get some input from the agency. Concern about the product definition is always the time to go through. We talked about the RFD. That's a time to engage with the agency. Outstanding questions on the test plan is a key piece of this. And we'll talk a lot more later about how to approach an FDA meeting and how that process works. But know that, I'll say this now and I'll say it again later, you are the expert on the product, not the FDA. The FDA is an expert on medical device regulations and they have seen a lot of medical devices, but you know that product better than they do. So it is oftentimes that I have a company come to me and say, oh, we're just going to ask FDA what they want. That's not always the best approach. If you ask them what they want, how is that helping you get what you want? And how much confidence does that instill that you know everything about your product? So be careful of that. The considerations of any kind of interaction with the agency in this forum is that it's non-binding. So buyer beware. I have many examples of situations where we have gone to the agency in a pre-IDE format, a pre-submission format, and been told lots of great information and been provided a lot of great guidance, and then had the agency, we submit the IDE and say, yeah, we're going to do great, it's going to fly through, and magically it's like there's been some change of every person down at FDA, and they have total amnesia because the letter you get back is not an approval letter, and there's questions in there that are nothing like what you discussed at the pre-IDE. So remember this, non-binding. Not every division of FDA, not every reviewer at FDA, but it has happened. It adds time to the process, but sometimes it's saving time to the process because you do need to do an actual submission for a pre-IDE. Gone are the days, when I first started in this business, I would call a reviewer at FDA and say, hey, can we come down? And she'd say, oh yeah, come down next week. And we'd go down next week and we'd maybe, just exchange information a little bit ahead of time, but there was none of this formal process like there is now. And then, so there is a time for them to review that. They have to schedule the meeting. You have to then do your homework to get ready for that meeting, and then at the end, address any of the issues that are brought up. Sometimes this is exactly what you need to move your product development path forward, but sometimes it's a slowdown. So the times to do it for outstanding questions on the test side, absolutely when you have an animal model that is not well defined. Absolutely engage with the agency on animal models. They're expensive. You do not want to make a mistake there. You don't want to spend a lot of time on 6-month implant animals when they wanted 9-month implant animals. And oh, by the way, you sacked all your animals so you don't have anybody left to go 9 months. And the number of animals is always another key piece of this. Also, I didn't put on there, but also the animal model itself. Porcine versus rats or rabbits or dogs or baboon or sheep. There's a whole host of models out there. When you have a novel clinical study design, we didn't talk about all the clinical study design almost intentionally because that's a whole nother talk that we could spend another session on, which is clever and regulatory strategy surrounding clinical trial design. Dr. Hirsch alluded to non-inferiority trial designs. Those are big right now for sure, and I will not say that that's always they're large. If you can figure out a way to do a superiority trial, it really is quite helpful in the long run, both on the reimbursement side as well as the regulatory side. It's pretty hard to say no to approving something that was demonstrated to be better than something else. So we also spend a lot of time right now. Adaptive trial designs are very, very hot, and because they save time and money. They save patients, but there's a lot of planning that goes into that. You absolutely positively should never submit an adaptive trial design that you haven't discussed with FDA first. And utilizing an objective performance criteria rather than running a randomized controlled trial, you absolutely need to get a buy-in from FDA that your objective performance criteria is acceptable. So that's the trial design. These are the absolute times that I would say engage. And then when you have a challenge to a regulatory pathway, when you think you have established a valid predicate for a 510K, or you believe that you have something that is a low-risk device, which is looking like a de novo pathway, I would engage with them. They will not commit until until you've actually completed a clinical trial and filed a submission, but you want to plant the seed early and often. And how to do the regulatory discussion, this is the bare bones of it. You contact the division chair. If you don't know a reviewer in the division, you go right to the chair. They'll assign it to somebody. You will have to put together that formal pre-submission. It is a written dossier, includes a description of the product, the indication or the target indication, your test plan, clinical protocol summary, and then your specific FDA questions. Submissions get logged in with the Document Mail Center now. They get an I number, and the agency reviewer will make contact to schedule a face-to-face meeting, presumably. So you may need to nudge that reviewer or that division chair if things are sitting for a little bit. It's assertive but not pushy. Squeaky wheel gets the grease down at FDA. Those reviewers, it's a thankless job. I'm glad I don't do that for a living because they're overworked and underpaid and do need to be at least communicated to. And we'll talk, I'll give you a little bit of my do's and don'ts for pre-IDE meetings or pre-sub meetings a little bit later, but let's finish walking through the process. Step 4 is reimbursement. I put it right up there. I am not a reimbursement expert. Again, this is another person that I would involve early. You want to know if you have a valid reimbursement option, because if there's a reimbursement option, you want to make sure that your clinical trial addresses the important endpoints. Dr. Hirsch mentioned the quality of life assessments. You know, I have a lot of clients that say, let's just throw that QOL in there. Let's just throw the SF-36 in. The SF-36 is expensive to administer. And if it's not something that you need, then there really is no need to do it. Or maybe the SF-36 isn't the right quality of life tool. Maybe you need the living with heart disease tool, which is more defined for heart disease patients, and you have a heart disease product. So be careful of just, randomly throwing kitchen sink reimbursement things into a protocol without carefully thinking through. And then you want to know, is there something already available? We're just latching on. We're a Me Too product. I don't need to address reimbursement. We're making our widgets faster, and they're easier to use, and we'll just latch on to somebody else's. It's an improvement to an existing product. That might be the case, but just make sure that you walk through that and think through it. And then if there's something really novel, just like we do pre-sub meetings with the FDA, we do pre-sub meetings with CMS. They're not as informative, I find, but I think they are still helpful for CMS to understand what's coming somewhere down the pike later. I would encourage that you make sure that if CMS is interested in something specific, or you can talk to the Blues, you can talk to the independents, get a lay of the land so that you know that you're collecting clinical data that addresses their needs. So in summary, because this is a big piece of it, this pre-market strategy, we want to ensure the product code. We want to determine the V&V plan out of this, identify any reimbursement considerations that are linked to the regulatory strategy. So now let's talk about the next type of strategic regulatory, which I put under the bucket of ongoing submissions. And this is, so we've submitted our, let's say we're doing an IDE PMA path product. We've submitted our IDE, got the unconditional approval, And we are off to the races. We're in the midst of our clinical trial, and we're humming along. And now we have some need to talk to them. I give you a list of the reasons to engage. We need to make a protocol change. This is oftentimes what has to happen during a PMA, during an IDE to PMA process. It can be painful. If you are changing protocol, we could be just changing a little tiny component of the protocol, like I want to add a phone call visit, or I want to extend the follow-up to 24 months instead of just 12 months. But if we're changing inclusion-exclusion criteria, or we're changing the type of follow-up, we're going to get rid of a formal visit and we're going to replace that with a phone call. Those all have implications to the downstream effect, the poolability of the data in the end for a PMA application. Those will need to be very, very carefully postured with the agency. You need to work with your analysis team to make sure that it's not going to have implications, downstream effect, but sometimes they are necessary. And I would tell you that we encourage, if you are a stalemate protocol, meaning you're not getting enrollment the way that you should be, and you've got a screening log that says, if I just tweak this one inclusion criteria, it will open the floodgates for enrollment. FDA is going to listen to that. They are practical too. They understand it. They don't want something so burdensome that the product's never going to get fully evaluated. So take care with these. This is always a tough dialogue. I think that it ends up being easier in the end. I always find that there's a lot of heartache that goes into when there is a bad event that occurs in a clinical trial. It is not something to be afraid of. Bad things happen in clinical trials. That's the name of the game. It does need to be discussed with the agency. Do an evaluation. Do a root cause analysis. Engineering needs to assess that it is or is not related to a product issue. Use a clinical events committee to adjudicate the event. Get an independent assessment of that from a data monitoring committee. All of those pieces come together in a presentation to the agency. This is what happened. This is why it happened. This is what we need to do to change it. Or this is why we don't need to worry about it in the future. That's I would engage with the agency on those kinds of pieces. Request for expansion on a product indication. This would be, it relates a little bit to the change in inclusion-exclusion criteria. I have a product, I'm studying this device for use in the LAD. But I'm going to say that, okay, now I don't want it in the LAD, I want it in the right coronary artery. That's an ongoing submission. And then we need to engage when you're done with the IDE and you're ready to go to PMA. That's the pre-PMA pathway. And of course, all the panel meeting discussions. That's well down the pathway. So the last one is marketed products with a need for a submission. So I have a 510K, and it has a tool claim, but I want a clinical indication claim. I've worked on a variety of these. That is shifting a product that already has market clearance in a 510K world to a PMA product, because when you have a tool claim, it's a 510K. When you have a clinical claim, it's a PMA. So that's an enhancement of the indication. I would engage with FDA. If there's a safety concern, I have a recall. I wanted to engage with the agency to get that product back on the market. Off-label issues. I have an investigation by the DOJ. You want to engage with the agency on that, obviously. Okay, let's just spend a couple minutes. We're almost done here. This is my do's and don'ts for having a meeting with the regulator. And that, I'd say regulator because it could be notified body, it could be a competent authority. Logistics. This is the easy thing. Face-to-face is always best. I like the face-to-face. FDA doesn't like the face-to-face because it's hard for them logistically. Sometimes you need to force this. Establish a schedule for preparation. Get your date and work backwards. Timeline it, just like it's any other deliverable. It's important. Get a hotel the evening before. Don't fly in the day of the meeting. Schedule prep sessions with your experts. Get independent physician experts with you. It carries a lot more weight with that medical reviewer at the agency. The meeting prep. Know your division. Know those reviewers. Remember that they are people. They have lives. Engage with them. Get to know them. I know all about some of these reviewers. I know their kids. I know who's going to college, where they're going. Your debate with them should be science-based, not sales-based. You can leave the head of sales and marketing at home. It doesn't always help. FDA doesn't care about how much revenue is going to be lost if this product does or doesn't make it to the market. They just are going to be put off by that. So keep it science. Prepare for negotiations. Do the debate. Have your backup plan. Go with your first desire and then have your backup. And be ready for the challenges. Know the questions. You know, it's like any talk. Know what your vulnerabilities are. Being overprepared is never a problem, but being underprepared can be devastating. Build the meeting plan. Develop your key messages. Start with messaging first. Assemble those right speakers. Have somebody be a scribe, and brainstorm the Q&A. You want to walk through this. I treat the pre-sub meetings almost the same way that I treat panel meeting prep. Approach your presentation with confidence, please. Don't be, oh, we're here because we want you to tell us what to do. No, we're here, FDA. We're here to talk to you about our whiz-bang device. We'd like to tell you where the whiz-bang device is needed medically. Here's how the whiz-bang device works, and here's the best way to evaluate the whiz-bang device. Did you have any input for this or anything you'd like us to expand upon? That's presenting the whiz-bang device in a pre-sub. You're looking for their guidance, not their direction. And know your submission completely. The worst thing to do is go in there at the time of PMA and say, hey, you know, way back 3 years ago when you submitted this IDE, it had this little test in here, and you said you were going to follow up on that, and you never did. When are you going to do that? And you're in there talking about the clinical results. That's the kiss of death. Research all your competitive products, so know your challenges and understand the literature, because I hate when someone comes in and says, oh, the medical reviewer comes in and said, did you see this article that was just recently published? Did you see this HTN3 simplicity trial results? And you're coming in with a competitive device. And just put yourself in their shoes and understand, what would they ask? If I knew nothing about my product, what would they ask? Ending the meeting, always review and confirm your action items. Always leave the room with clear direction. And always say thank you, just like your mom told you. Please and thank you. And just a few other points. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. So strategy comes from experience. Research and discussion are always vital. Know what you're doing, research it, talk about it, collaborate, understand the product and where it fits and how it fits in the medical setting. And a good strategy is born out of a team of individuals. It's not regulatory, it's not marketing, it's not clinical, it's not engineering. It's everybody working together. Thank you.